All right, I continue my 1901 project with Hero of the Empire, The Boer War, A Daring Escape, and the Making of Winston Churchill by Candice Millard, 2016 nonfiction book, all about a very young 24-year-old Winston Churchill who in 1899 is arriving in the latest trouble spot for the forces of the British Empire in South Africa, where the Boer War is kicking off. The 1901 project is me reading around the year of my grandfather's birth, which is 1901. So that is 10 years before 1890 to 1910, basically, is kind of the period where I'm just trying to learn all about stuff, find as many books. The Hero of the Empire I listened to from my library. I have read Candice Millard before. I read her book on Richard Burton and John Hanning's Spike, The River of the Gods, Genius, Courage, and the Betrayal in the Search of the Source of the Nile, a 2022 book. So this is a bit earlier for her. So yes, this is Churchill, who is, yes, he's young, but he is looking for glory abroad because at this point in politics and in British politics at the time, that is a way to get a leg up. You get glory abroad in working for the empire. He was an officer in India and the Sudan, and then as a journalist covering kind of the Cuban uprising, basically trying to get his oar in, trying to get glory. He felt this Millard very much says this is a guy who felt like he quotes him as saying, "I have a destiny," and indeed had just sort of this arrogance where troops would come under fire when he was an officer, and he wouldn't duck because of course some stray bullet isn't going to kill me. I am destined for greatness. Of course, this is Winston Churchill, who would of course go on to lead Britain during World War II as the great voice, the great leader of forces against Hitler. So yeah, it's very annoying when someone like this actually is right, or maybe his beliefs are such that he is able to write that history for himself, and also perhaps just be in the right place in the right time in history. Now, at this particular time in 1899, what we have are the Boers, Dutch settlers in what's going to become kind of South Africa, who they've gotten pushed around by the British, gotten pushed off of lands. And then what happens is, and they also came and were battling and killing and pushing off the actual indigenous peoples of that were in this part of this part of southern Africa. So doing their own pretty nasty stuff. But what happens is gold is discovered, and the British Empire wants their cut, and they're not going to ask for it; they're going to demand it, and the Boers resist. And indeed, the British are at the very top of the food chain at this point in the world. They are the superpower. And they're like, okay, we're just going to go in there, knock some heads. We'll get this done. We'll massacre, or basically subjugate the Boers pretty quickly. They don't think that they're going to have any trouble whatsoever. However, we are now shifting into modern technology, powderless. Smokeless gunpowder is what I'm trying to say. Artillery. The Boers have been fighting against some pretty formidable opponents in the of the indigenous indigenous Southern Africans, and they've learned stuff like maybe we're not going to just march across the plain. We're going to hide. We're going to shoot from long distances. We don't have powder. We don't have puffs of smoke anymore, so we can do sniper attacks. The British get their asses handed to them initially at the start of this conflict. This conflict goes on for a lot longer than the British like. Now, what we find out and how Candice Millard opens this is Winston Churchill gets himself captured. He is a journalist. We learned through the thing that he was a journalist who felt very free for sort of basically, he's the kind of guy who just walks into a situation and takes command, even at 24, and is very free with his advice. And when the shit hits the fan, when he's on a train, he takes command of the forces and tries to kind of like organize things and drive people on. He becomes a soldier, even though he's a journalist. He gets captured. He gets tossed into a prisoner of war camp. And the South Africans, the Boers actually do treat their prisoners of war, correctly, kindly, with a certain amount of, humanity, honor. These are other white Europeans, so there's that. But we're going to see later on that the British have a different view on how to take care of these things. So he's been captured. He makes appeals. They're not going to let him go, so he decides to escape, and he hops onto some people's escape plans, and this is where we find him at the very beginning of the book, and then we kind of flash back, and Candice Millard does a very good job of kind of filling you in on like all the kind of the details of Winston Churchill's life, his kind of beautiful, boisterous, kind of very impressive mother, the political situation of the Boers, of the British Empire. So yeah, I mean, in addition to kind of pointing out kind of the advances in technological things, there is a certain amount of acknowledgement of, both the British and the Boers. Neither of them should be here. They're both colonial powers who have come in and used might, used force to rob the people who actually live in this area, the indigenous people who live in this area. And indeed, there's definitely, from what Millard says, what the British do, even though they do it with a kind of a better kind of PR and smile, by the time this is over, the Boers are going to be back in command, and the Boers are maybe further weaponized against treating black South Africans like complete shit. And we get a very kind of light because of where Winston Churchill's story takes place. It sort of says like, oh, and after this came the British used concentration camps where they placed both Boers and actually even more black South Africans in concentration camps, and where people were methodically starved to death and died. This is the origin of concentration camps that would get used by Germany later on in the life. The British were under Kitchener were extremely brutal. But you have to keep in mind that this is basically the colonial playbook. You go in and you do disproportionate retaliation for any signs of disobedience. You are ruling by fear. The British were the masters of this, the par exemplars of this at this time. So it is really, I don't know I don't know if Candice Millard is able to kind of stress that enough. I mean, it is the kind of thing where I do think about for my 1901 project, where I'm kind of reading about this time in the world, is like, how do you kind of address this stuff? I'm fascinated by this stuff. I'm interested in this stuff. I want the unredacted history. I want to know about the racism, the colonialism of the time, because it's important to actually know these things, be aware of them, and not try and kind of whitewash things and make things less horrible than they were. That average people were quite happy with all of this setup. Where yes, let's go to South Africa, let's bash the Boers, let's bash the South Africans. Yes, there were people who were against this and protested vociferously when the kind of like what Kitchener was doing was revealed. But you do get the sense that also, no, he's a tool for the British government that they were quite happy to use. And this wasn't like a rogue element. No, this is the leader of the thing, executing a policy that was going to try and keep the British Empire at the top of the food chain. So that, I mean, that's why I think you get into the thing of like, oh, this is, Winston Churchill becoming the hero of the empire. It's like, well, how I have a, maybe this is kind of the underlying dissatisfaction with this book, and actually with her book on Richard Francis Burton, is the idea of, at one point, I just within my own memory, this was kind of unproblematic. It's like, oh, these daring adventurers going out into the strange, exotic world. It's like now you're like, no, these are kind of agents of a empire, a economic empire that was using their force of military might, and the talents of a lot of quite amazing men and women probably, to exploit other countries with any means necessary. So it's like, in the end, it's like hero of the empire. It's like, great, he's hero of this empire, this shitty, horrible empire. It's kind of balancing those things. But I have a strange sympathy for Candice Millard as I'm going into this project of like, okay, I'm going to be kind of delving into a lot of people who are really interesting, really fascinating, really talented. But there's some underlying structural things, like the colonialism of the time, the sexism, racism of the time is really terrible. It's really terrible. But it's like, yeah, it's stuff that I want to know. I want to know I want to know kind of an unvarnished, detailed kind of truth about this time that my grandfather was born into, to really transport me to not just the dry recitation of facts, but kind of just really get into what that felt like at that time. And so this was a good book. It was interesting to read. But it's also showing me kind of pitfalls as I go along in this project, which I may or may not be able to avoid. I'm a white dude in Canada. There's plenty of blind spots and pitfalls for me to fall into. But yeah, that's where I'm at there at the moment. This is the hero of the empire, the Boer War, a daring escape, and the making of Winston Churchill by Candice Millard. More videos later.